We remember from our CCNA studies that the running configuration for a router is the configuration that's active in RAM right now, but if we reboot the router, what's in RAM, that running configuration, it's going to be lost. So what we'll normally do is, after making a change, we'll copy the running configuration to the startup configuration. We could use a command something like this. We could say copy running-config to startup-config, or just as a shortcut, we might say copy run star, or some people say WR, which is short for write memory. That will do it as well. But as we're doing network maintenance and network troubleshooting, it might be a good idea to copy our running configuration or our startup configuration somewhere else, off of the router. That way, if something happens to the router, if the router goes out, we lose the power supply, it has to be replaced, we've still got a good copy of our running configuration. This could be part of our network documentation. Let's talk about how we can copy the running configuration off of our router and store it on an external server. And we could do this on a TFTP server, an FTP server, a secure copy server, HTTP, HTTPS. We've got options. Just as an example, I'm going to use an FTP server. I could do this. I could say copy run FTP : / and I need to specify the credentials to log me into this FTP server. And the FTP server I have has a username of Cisco, and we give a : and then we give the password, and the password is Cisco. Not a good username password combination for the real world, but it's what I'm using here in my test environment. We give the username and the password, and then we say @ we give the @ symbol, and then we can specify the IP address of the TFTP server. In my case, it's 192.168.1.23, and now I can specify the name of the file as it's going to exist on the FTP server. This is router R1. I'm going to say r1.cfg for router 1 configuration. And it's going to copy over to that FTP server, and we get a message that it has been written. Great. Now I have a copy of my running configuration in case something happens to my router. It's stored on this FTP server. One thing that we might want to tweak about this process is notice how I had to give the username and the password right here. If somebody were shoulder surfing, they were looking over my shoulder, they might see that username and password combination in clear text right there on the screen. It might be more secure for us to not have to do that. What we can do instead is configure the router with the FTP username and password. Here's how we can do that. Let's go into global configuration mode, and I'm going to say IP FTP username Cisco, IP FTP password Cisco. I've now told the router here's the username and password to use when we're copying to or copying from an FTP server. Let's try our copy command again. This time I'll say copy run FTP : // but this time I'm not going to specify a username and password because it's already stored in the router. I'll give the IP address of the FTP server. It's 192.168.1.23. I'll again use a file name of r1.cfg, and let's see if it copies. It does, and it did not prompt me for the username and password because that was globally configured. And while it's great that we can go in and manually copy our configuration file to an external server in case something happens to our router, this is a manual process. And it would be really convenient if we could have this happening automatically based on a period of time or based on us writing the running configuration to the startup configuration. And that's possible with the archive service built into Cisco iOS. Let me show you how to set it up. And before I configure the archive service, I want to create a directory to store those archived configuration files. It's interesting that the flash of our Cisco router acts a lot like the file system on a Unix operating system or a DOS operating system. It sort of acts like a combination of both, actually. Let me show you what I mean. I can give the Unix command, pwd for print working directory, and it shows me that I'm in the root of flash. And another command I can give, another Unix command, is mkdir, make directory. I want to make a directory where I can store my configuration archives. I'll say make directory, mkdir, config-archive. Let's enter that. And now if I do a dir, a DOS command, I can see that I've got the config-archive directory. That's what this D means. And I can change directory into config-archive. I'll do a cd config-archive. And now if I do a pwd, it shows that my current directory is config-archive. And if I do a dir here, you see that there are no files in this directory. I'm in this subdirectory. To get back to the parent directory, back to the root, I'll do a cd space ... And now I'm back to the root. And now we have this directory created where we can store our archived configurations. Let's set up the archive feature. Let's go into global configuration mode and we'll say archive to go into archive configuration mode. And I want to specify the path and the structure of the file name that's going to be used when I'm writing one of these archived configuration files. I'm going to say that my path is flash. Oh, by the way, you could say that the path is on an external server. I'll show you that with some context-sensitive help. But I'm just going to store it to flash. I'll say that the path is flash : and I'm going to specify the subdirectory. We'll say config-archive. I'll give another slash, and I can use a variable of $H, which will be replaced with the router's host name, which is R1. I could use a $T to put a date timestamp on this, but I'm going to use $H, but even though I'm just saying $H, it's still going to uniquely name my archived files. It's going to put a number after them. I'll show you what I mean. Let's enter $H. That's the path. That's where I'm going to be storing my archive files. Now we need to say what's going to cause one of these archives to be written. It could be based on a period of time. We could say do it every so often. We could say time-period, and we could specify a number of minutes. I'm going to enter 10,080 minutes. That's the number of minutes in a week. This way, every week, we'll automatically make a copy of our running config to one of these archive files. But let's do something else. Let's say every time we write our running configuration to the startup configuration, because that implies we made a change, let's say every time we do that, we want to make an archive of our running configuration. And some context-sensitive help reveals the command we would use to do that. It's write memory. So let's say write memory. And now let's test it. I'm going to do a write memory, or I'm going to do a copy run star command, and this should have caused an archive file to be written. And we can see that it is written by doing a show archive command, and we can see that it named my file R1-0. If I did it again, it would be R1-1. In fact, we can see that that would be the name of the next file. And notice it's in this subdirectory. And now if I ever want to go back to my previous configuration, I've got a copy of that previous configuration. In fact, there's a way without rebooting the router to replace the running configuration with our archived configuration. Notice I said replace. I'm not talking about merging a configuration file with our running config that you might have learned about back in your CCNA studies. I'm talking about replacing what's running in the running configuration with this archived file. Just to get some evidence that this is really working, I'm going to go in and I'm going to change the name of this router. Let's set the host name to temp. And now if I successfully replace my running config with this archive file, which has the host name set to R1, we should see that on screen. Here's a command we could use to, without rebooting the router, replace the running configuration with a backup of our configuration. I'm just going to use this archive file that we have right here. I'm going to copy the path so I can just paste that in and not worry about mistyping it. So I've selected and copied that. Now let's say configure replace, and I'm going to paste in the path to the file I want to use. Configure replace with the file R1-0 in the config-archive subdirectory in Flash. Let's press enter, and we get a very verbose warning telling us that this is going to replace our current running configuration. And it says, are you sure you want to proceed? And I'll type in a Y to say, yes, I'm sure I want to proceed. And let's see if, oh, and it did. I was going to say, let's see if the host name of temp gets replaced with a host name of R1, and it did. Great news. That gives us evidence that our running config was actually replaced with this backup, with this archive configuration.